Bienvenidos a todos a un nuevo y el último webinario del año del Ayn Rand Center Latinoamérica. Mi nombre es María Martí, soy presidente del Ayn Rand Center Latinoamérica y en esta ocasión estamos haciendo este último webinario conjuntamente con el Ayn Rand Institute. Como sabrán, ya hace un tiempo hemos empezado a incluir el sistema de traducción simultánea, así que para todos aquellos que estén aquí con nosotros de Latinoamérica, que prefieran escuchar este webinario en español, van a ver dentro de la barra de abajo un globo que dice interpretación. Pueden seleccionar ahí, cliquear ahí y seleccionar español, donde podrán escuchar a nuestra intérprete Mini Alonso haciendo la traducción de Yaron Brook. Lo mismo, también quiero invitarlos al final de la charla de Yaron Brook, pueden hacer todas las preguntas que deseen, las puedes mandar incluso en español al Q&A, desde donde Agustina Vergara Cid va a traducirlas al inglés. Así que siéntanse invitados a hacer las preguntas que deseen. Sin dar mucha más charla, les agradezco que nos hayan acompañado durante todo el año. Y vamos a empezar con un tema bastante controversial, como es el que hemos seleccionado para Yaron Brook hoy, que es Biden, Trump y lo que la libertad realmente significa. Sin más, Yaron, how are you? Are you there?
I'm good, thank you. Doing well.
Thank you very much for doing this webinar for Ayn Rand Center Latin America and also for Ayn Rand Institute. I know that is a particular topic for you, Biden, Trump, and what freedom really is, but many people want to hear your position about this topic. So thank you very much for being here. Welcome, and okay, the audience, it's all for you.
Thank you, Maria. It's always a pleasure to be speaking in Latin America. It's just too bad I have to do it remotely from California. I wish I could be with you. Live, three-dimensional, in person. We've just completed maybe the most contentious, at least in modern times, election we have ever seen, and maybe what I think made it so dramatically contentious is not so much the behavior of the candidates themselves, although that one could analyze that in and of itself, but the passion with which people took to this election, the frame of mind in which people entered this election, and indeed still carries to this day. I mean, right now we're sitting at the end of December. It is the 22nd of December. The Electoral College has already voted and voted Joe Biden into the presidency. And yet there is a large group of people, who still are insisting that Donald Trump not only has won this election, but will win this election, that come January 20th, it'll be Donald Trump who is inaugurated as president of the United States for another 4 years. I mean, it is at such a level of tribalism. The delusion has taken over many people who are Trump supporters, and indeed, the thing that has characterized this election more than any other thing is the overt tribalism of both sides, the just unthinking mentality that has supported on both sides an agenda without questioning, without thinking. Now, this is particularly concerning, and this is the relationship to freedom and liberty. This is particularly concerning with regard to those who have become committed to the idea that Trump is somehow a savior of liberty and freedom, or that liberty and freedom will be saved if Trump is defeated. I mean, I hate to break it to you guys, but the reality is that this election will not, in the long run, determine the course of civilization, will not in the long run determine whether we are heading towards liberty and freedom. It might determine the pace, the speed, but neither one of these candidates is a liberty or freedom candidate. One is obviously a leftist who would like to have government intervene in every economic aspect of our lives, or in many of the economic aspects of our lives. But today, with the far left, much more than that, would like to intervene in our ability to speak freely, would like to, the far left would like to intervene in who we hire, how we hire them, the kind of relationship between groups within society. They would like to intervene in every aspect of our lives. So clearly on the left, you do not today have, as a dominant force, a force that is pro-liberty and freedom. So is it the case that on the right, that in the Republican Party, on what is perceived as the right, we have defenders of liberty and freedom? And certainly we don't, not if the right is associated with Donald Trump. We have, again, an administration, a president, and it's a movement dedicated to restrictions on freedom, restrictions on our freedom to trade, restriction on our freedom to move, restrictions on our freedom to speak. We have a clear authoritarian bent both on the left and on the right when it comes to politics, certainly when it comes to markets. Both want to micromanage, both want to centrally plan. We saw this in COVID. They want to shut us down. They want us in our homes. In other words, one way or the other, they want us to follow orders. I mean, look at what Trump did, for those of you jumping up and down. But Trump didn't want, well, first, Trump very much wanted lockdowns in New York City in March. He actually lambasted Blasio for doing it too slowly. But then think about things like the moratorium on rents, the fact that the Trump administration has basically told people they don't have to pay rent until the beginning of the year. And now with the passage of the stimulus package, it's been extended for another month. That is central planning. That is redistribution of wealth on a large scale that you would expect of the traditional left. And now you're getting it from the new right. If you think about Trump and Biden, there is no Thomas Jefferson here. There is no John Adams. There is no George Washington. There are no fighters or believers in the cause of liberty, the cause of freedom. Now, I'm not saying, nothing of what I've said means that you shouldn't have voted for this guy or should have voted for that guy. My point is that that's not the issue. That whether you voted for Trump or voted for Biden or didn't vote at all, you have to be objective about who they are and what ideas they represent and what the right and left have become in the United States of America. And the fact that neither candidate, neither movement, neither political party actually represents the cause of liberty and freedom. Indeed, the entire spectrum today of left and right is dominated by collectivists of various attributes, but they're all collectivists. They're all interventionists. They're all statists. Some might belong nominally to the right, others might belong to the left. But when you look at policies, when you look at the way they frame the issues, when you look at the philosophical underpinnings of their ideas, there are no vast differences between them. So you might believe that voting for Trump will slow the end down, will slow authoritarianism down, and therefore it buys the forces of liberty and freedom time to win. You might believe that voting for Biden was the right course of action, because that would actually slow down the rise of authoritarianism and would actually buy us more time to establish freedom and liberty. That is a disagreement about strategy. And it's a disagreement that is worth having. I have a particular opinion about it. But that's a disagreement that's viable, realistic. I could make arguments for either one of those. But that's not what I'm seeing. I'm seeing people who have taken a stake on the side of liberty and freedom and are treating Trump as a messiah, a savior for that cause. Not somebody who will just buy us a little bit of time, somebody who's clearly violating rights, somebody who's clearly anti-liberty and freedom, but at least he's not the left and he's buying us some time. If that were the case, then we could have the strategic discussion about whether voting for him is better or not. But that has not been my experience in this election. I've never seen such passion, such vehemence, such commitment as I've seen in this election to one side or the other, particularly to the Trump side. Not even in the days of Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher, who you could argue were a little closer to being advocates of liberty than Trump ever will be. So the point I want to make today, and I'm going to step back from the particulars of this election, is that on the political map today, on what is perceived as right and left on that spectrum of the world today, there are no popular advocates of freedom and liberty. It is sad, but that is the reality. If you value freedom and liberty, then it is not to our political world that you should look. It is not to politicians that you should look, not existing politicians. There is a lot of work to be done so that one day we can have another Jefferson, so that one day we can have another Washington, so one day we can have an advocate of freedom, an advocate of liberty. But that's going to require real work. Work that politics distracts right now from. Work that committing oneself passionately to one presidential candidate over the other detracts from. Work that a mindless commitment to one candidate undermines. So what kind of work is necessary? Well, first, when we talk about freedom and liberty, what do we mean? What does freedom and liberty actually mean? What would the world look like if we were actually free? Well, a free society is a society in which you as an individual are free to pursue your values, the values that you deem necessary for your life, you deem rationally necessary for your life over the long run, for your happiness, for your success, for your flourishing as a human being. Freedom, a free society, is a society where all force is the enemy of our choices, is the enemy of our reason, is the enemy of our ability to make those kind of choices. So a free society is a society in which all force is monopolized by the government, and that the government uses it only to accomplish the preservation, the protection of our rights in an objective manner through objective procedures. So a proper government is a government that protects our freedom, that protects our ability to act in pursuit of our values, that protects our ability to think, to speak, to live in pursuit of our individual happiness. A proper government doesn't constantly tell us what we can and cannot buy, from whom we can and cannot buy it, what price we can and cannot buy it at. It doesn't tell us who we can and cannot employ and under what conditions and how much we should pay them. It doesn't tell us who we can marry, who we can sleep with. It doesn't tell us what we can and cannot do with our own bodies, what we can and cannot say, what we can and cannot print. A proper government in a free society steps back. It protects our liberty. It protects our freedom to act on our own behalf, to act in pursuit of our own values. It protects our rights, our individual rights, properly understood, the freedoms of action. And as long as we don't hurt anybody else, as long as we do not initiate force on anyone else, such a government leaves us alone. It leaves us free of coercion, free of force, free of authority. Now, there is nobody on the political map today arguing for this. There is nobody on the political spectrum today arguing even for moving in that direction. Yes, some would like to regulate industry A more than industry B, and others would like to do industry B more than industry A. But nobody out there is arguing for not regulating. Some would like to control the economy somewhat, but to control other aspects of our lives more. Others would like to control other aspects of our life less, the economy more. And some would like to control everything, every aspect of our life. But the political battle in the world in which we live today, specifically in the United States, but my belief is that this is true all over the world, is between all kinds of collectivists, all kinds of variations of statists. Some might allow us a little bit more freedom. Others might oppress us more. But these are only degrees. And nobody is on a path. Nobody is advocating a path to freedom. Not even a moderate path to freedom, not even a slow path to freedom. You can see this in, conservative government in the UK, the United Kingdom, that is locking everybody down in their country, but is also embracing a Green New Deal and embracing socialized medicine, reinforcing the existing socialized medicine, growing it, building it even further. So yes, you could make an argument that better than the left, but a little bit. And over the long run, we know that they're not advocates for freedom. They're not moving us towards liberty. They're moving us towards socialism, just slower. So the first thing we have to do is just tone the debate down. Because this is not about serfdom or freedom, because there is no side of freedom here. This is about disagreements about the rate in which we achieve serfdom, at which we achieve authoritarianism, which we achieve fascism or socialism or some variation of statism. But that's where we're heading. If nothing changes, that's where we're heading. And the energy that we should be devoted on the foundations of freedom. Freedom is very, very rare in human history. Very rare. Even the limited freedom and the declining freedom we have today, we're freer today than almost at any time in human history. And 99% of human history, we are being unfree. It's only the last 250 years since the Enlightenment that this idea of freedom even exists. It's a rare phenomenon that happens very infrequently and can be stomped out relatively easily. Well, we should be devoting our energies, our efforts, is to educating people about freedom, about its value, about where it comes from, and the ideas that are necessary to maintain it. So I want to say a little bit about what we should be focusing on rather than the constant barrage of passionate, endless politics and political debate and discussion and fights and arguments. What are the ideas that freedom rests on? And how do we get those ideas out there into the culture? How do we educate people about the ideas? Freedom is not in the hearts of all men, as George Bush once said. Freedom is not self-evident to people, as I think many libertarians think. Freedom is a massive achievement. The idea of freedom is a massive achievement. And then the implementation of freedom is an achievement on top of an achievement. And we should use the fact that we still have some freedom in the world in which we have today to advocate for it, to educate people about it. Freedom rests on deep philosophical ideas. I think there are two that are fundamental, that in a sense were discovered during the Enlightenment and have led to where we are today, that we need to resurrect, reinforce, fight for, argue for, debate for, dedicate our energies towards. The first idea, and maybe in a sense the most important idea, is that men are capable of knowing the world around them. That reason is our tool of knowledge, of cognition. That we can know the world, we can understand it. That understanding does not come from revelation. That understanding does not come from philosopher kings. That knowledge is not ingrained in our genes, in our DNA. That knowledge is an achievement, but an achievement available to every human being. Every human being has the capacity to reason and therefore has the capacity to know the world. Because think about when that idea does not exist. If you believe that knowledge is achieved through some kind of revelation, but it turns out always that not everybody has the ability to get the revelation. We need philosopher kings or popes or leaders to tell us what the truth is, how we should live our lives. As individuals, we are told we're impotent. You don't know anything. You don't know the truth. That's just your subjective feelings. We're told constantly. Well, who said that you're right or that idea is right? There's a rejection of evidence, a rejection of reason, a rejection of facts, because they believe truth comes from another dimension. Truth is only available to experts. Truth is only available to those who are uniquely qualified to discover it. Well, if truth is only available to them, then they must guide us, they must lead us, they must tell us what to do. And they're eager. They are eager to jump at the opportunity to do exactly that. To control us and to impose their values, their will on all of us. And many people accept it, and many people accept it because they don't believe their own mind. They don't believe their ability to discover reason, to discover truth for themselves. And then there's a whole class of people who tell us that what you know is in your DNA. Everything is in your DNA. Everything is determined by your genes. Your effort makes nothing. Well, then what is truth? What our DNA tells us or what their DNA tells us? Truth is out the window. Truth doesn't exist. Truth is impossible to discover. You either know it or you don't know it. Your effort, your thinking, your reasoning makes no difference. We hear this from intellectuals constantly, that you're just a product of your DNA. You're just a product of evolution. You're just a product. And again, you don't know what the truth is. All these theories basically undermine your ability as an individual to have confidence in your ability to live, to know, to discover truth, and to live by that truth. So you're left impotent. And there's no accident that in an environment in which we are told constantly that you cannot discover truth because either it's revealed to some or it's in your genes, and if you don't know it, you just don't know it. We see a rise in tribalism. We see a rise in cynicism, skepticism. We see a dramatic rise in emotionalism, and a rush to tribalism and a search for a leader to tell us what to do. People need guidance. They need some principles to guide their life. And if they can't discover those principles for themselves, then they will ask somebody else to guide their life for them. It's always been the case in human history. To get to freedom, we must first advocate for reason. We must first teach people that they do have access to truth. I mean, they know this at some level. They know this in their professional life. They know this at work. But they need to know it in a deeper sense. They need to know it that reason applies to all knowledge, not just the engineering that they do or whatever their profession is, but in every aspect of their life, in every aspect where knowledge is required. We need to denounce the idea that they're just products of their DNA. No, knowledge requires effort. It requires focus. It requires you committing yourself to truth, to discovery. So people need to understand that they have the means to live well, to achieve their happiness, to discover their values. So one, they have to know they can do it. They have the capacity to reason, and they can live, and they can survive, and they can thrive, and they can flourish. Second, we have to convince them, we have to teach them, we have to explain to them that their life is worthy, that the purpose of their life should be their life, should be their own survival, their own success, their own flourishing, and ultimately their own happiness. That their morality, that their moral code that has taught them for generations after generation after generation, that the purpose in life is to serve others, to serve God, to serve the community, to serve the needy, to serve their fellow man. That idea is wrong. Indeed, that idea is evil. Their purpose in life is to live the best life that they can live. They have the tool to do it, they reason. And they need the moral confidence to actually engage their reason in pursuit of their own happiness. So the two fundamental ideas at the heart of the battle for freedom are not Biden versus Trump or politics or left versus right or any of that. It is the two fundamental ideas, a reason, the fact that we can guide our lives, and individualism, the fact that it's right for us to guide our lives towards success and happiness. That's where the battle is. It's epistemological, in a sense of convincing people they have the tool, and it's ethical in a sense of convincing people that they should live for themselves. And that is ultimately the spectrum, if you will, the meaningful spectrum politically. It's one side, all the different people who think you cannot think for yourself. You cannot discover truth for yourself. You cannot actually live guided by your own mind, pursuing your own values, because you don't have the capacity to discover those ideas, those principles, those values. So all the mystics are on one side. And on the other side is reason. Other people believe that you have the tool to discover truth, that you have the tool to make choices for your own life. That's the spectrum. And then the people in between that think, oh, some truths you can discover and some stuff, and reason is sometimes good, but not always. So you need that spectrum. That's the spectrum that is meaningful. Mystics, reason-based. And if you think about mystics, you can see it on the left and on the right today. Well, the right has religious conservatives and religious, people of all kinds, including, President Trump, who I think has a really bad case of primacy of consciousness, which is a form of mysticism ultimately. Detachment from reality. And then on the left, the mystics, the mysticism and environmentalism, the complete irrationality and mysticism of the anti-racist, the so-called anti-racist of critical race theory. And you can go to postmodernism and all that. Irrationality on one side, rationality on the other side. That is a meaningful spectrum. It's not left and right. Irrationality, rationality. We are on the rational side. We need to fight for the rational side. The second spectrum is individualism on the one side and collectivism on the other. Who does your life belong to? What is your moral responsibility? Your own happiness or sacrifice to everybody else? That's a spectrum. Individualism on one side, collectivism on the other side. That is a spectrum worth fighting for. Fighting for the side of individualism. Now, of course, politics matters because politicians have an immense impact on our lives. We should care about politics because of that. It determines the scope of our freedom. But think about it. Collectivists and mystics are never going to be pro-freedom. Not fully, not really. They might be pro what seems like freedom for a while because it serves some other purpose. But collectivists and mystics are ultimately authoritarian. The more collectivist, the more mystic, the more authoritarian they are. The more they want to be told what to do. Their leaders want to tell you what to do. So collectivism and mysticism are the path towards authoritarianism and the end of any kind of freedom we have. The leaders want power and control. The masses want to be told what to do. On the other hand, if somebody's an individualist and an advocate or of reason, somebody who knows that rationality is the path to truth, then they trust their own mind. It doesn't mean, when I say trust your own mind and discover the truth, it doesn't mean that every truth you have to, in a first-handed way, discover. It means that you have a tool to do it. And you can then refer to experts and analyze what experts are saying or telling you. Evaluate them. You have the tool to evaluate what the experts are telling you. I mean, we all go to doctors. We don't expect to know everything. But when I go to a doctor, I don't go to a doctor blindly. So we depend on people. So when people have reason and are confident in their own ability to live a good life, to discover truth, to discover the values that are going to lead to their own happiness, and they believe that that's a worthy cause. People like that don't want mother government on their shoulder telling them what they can and cannot eat, what they can and cannot drink, what drugs they can and cannot take, when they can get a vaccine. They demand to be left alone. They demand their freedom. They demand their liberty. They demand to make decisions for themselves. People who respect reason and people who respect their own life and their own happiness will be free people because they will not tolerate anything else. So if we care about freedom, if we care about liberty, it is those ideas that we must fight for. The politics will take care of itself. The politics will resolve themselves. Now, so in my view, our focus should be on education. Our focus should be on philosophy. Our focus should be on ethics. Our focus should be on undoing the damage that hundreds of years of bad ideas have done to the culture. The freedom we have today is dependent on one short, brief period of a more rational philosophy that was embraced in the Enlightenment. But philosophically, that is dead a long time ago. We're still living on the fumes, on the intellectual fumes of the Enlightenment. Ayn Rand, though, has given us a philosophy, an integrated system that grounds the ideas, the better ideas of the Enlightenment on solid footing, with solid foundations. She provides us a proper moral defense of freedom, of capitalism, of individualism, a proper philosophical understanding of the role of reason in human life. We have no excuse today not to be fighting for freedom on philosophical ground. The tools are there. The tools have been granted to us. In Atlas Shrugged, in The Virtue of Selfishness, in Capitalism, Not Known Ideal, in Ayn Rand's brilliant philosophical writings and her novels. There's so much work to be done. There's so much to be achieved. A future of real freedom, of real liberty is such a value, is so important. That is where we should be focusing our energy. That is where we should be focusing our time, on writing, speaking, engaging, discussing, debating with people on these issues. Because once we can convince people of the power of reason and the importance of individualism, freedom, the politics will all take care of itself, and we will finally achieve kind of the world which we all desire, which we all want. So let's refocus that energy, that passion on what matters. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Yaron. It was a very good talk, very inspiring. So thank you. Thanks a lot. And I will start with one question. That we have a lot of questions right now, but I will start with I'm the owner here, so I will start with my question.
Sure.
So Ayn Rand said in one of the chapters in Philosophy Who Needs It, she said something like, no matter what are the conscious premises that Americans have, is their sense of life which is going to save Americans from falling into authoritarianism or something like that. So do you think in the last years, maybe that sense of life has switched in a different direction? And in that case, why?
Well, first, remember that Ayn Rand said that a sense of life cannot sustain itself forever without a philosophy, that ultimately it will decline. Ultimately, that sense of life will go away without a philosophical foundation to it. And I think the answer to whether this American sense of life has declined is yes. I think absolutely. Leonard Peikoff gave what I think is a brilliant talk. I think it was 2002, called Americans versus America, where he already in 2002 describes the decline in the American sense of life and how weak and pathetic and wrong the response was after 9/11, and how the Americans allowed it to happen, and that the Americans of previous generations would not have, would have been a lot tougher, a lot more, a lot stronger in their defense of their own values and defense of their own country. And I think it's only gotten worse since 2002. I think that the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan with no end and with no purpose, and with people, these kids dying for nothing, at least nothing that our leaders can communicate to us. I think then the financial crisis and our intellectuals blaming it on capitalism, on the American system, on freedom, on liberty, that caused the financial crisis. And then just the cultural, the philosophy of the culture, the ideas prevalent in the culture over the last 20 years have just slowly and systematically eroded that sense of life. And I really don't see it today. I once in a while, maybe you see a little spark of it. I thought in this last election, of all places, you maybe saw it in California, where they voted down affirmative action. They voted down increasing property taxes. They voted down the destruction of Uber and Lyft. They voted down a lot of these status things. It's almost like, all right, enough's enough. We don't agree. But it's so superficial and so ephemeral. It seems to go away very quickly that I don't know that it means anything. Although I actually thought this last election was quite positive in terms of how people voted and what actually happened in the election. I think the results were quite positive in generally in this last election in terms of Americans. But the American sense of life is has eroded significantly. And as Ayn Rand predicted, what it needs to resurrect it. And the American sense of life is like, don't tread on me. I can achieve anything. It's a sense of life of individualism. It's a sense of life of optimism. It's a sense of life of can-do attitude. I can get this done, right? Leave me alone, and anything is possible. That, has been undermined by religion and by philosophy. It's hard to bring it back without a real philosophical revolution, which is what I was arguing for in the talk.
Yeah, and that's what we are working for. So anonymous attendee is asking here, you said that this election won't determine much, but you're talking from a perspective of someone who lives in a relative free country. In Latin America, government is so monstrous and intrusive that the president does matter because he or she will determine your future. How are we to pursue our own values when politics take over our lives and everything that government does endangers our flourishing and survival?
Well, I mean, the solution is to find a way to get out of those places if it's that bad. And I know it's hard and I know it's difficult, but the fact is you only live once. And look, if you sit around waiting for Thomas Jefferson, you're going to die waiting because they're not coming. And if you think that, what was the guy's name who won in Argentina, became president of Argentina, who was a fan of the fountainhead? What was his name?
Macri.
Macri. So Macri got elected. Everybody was, yay, finally we have an advocate for liberty in Argentina, right? So maybe they weren't delusional. Maybe they said, okay, but he's better. He's going to make big, good changes, right? And then it turns out Macri's just like everybody else, and your rights are being violated just as much, but now he's doing it in the name of the fountainhead, because he's associated with Ayn Rand. So, without changing the fundamental beliefs, without changing the fundamental ideas, it's almost impossible to find a good person to run for president. It's almost impossible for that person to win. And then if he wins, it's almost impossible for him to get anything done, because now he's dependent on an entire bureaucracy, which is committed to statism. It's very, very hard to do. I mean, the only example I know where it was done in any kind of dramatic fashion is Margaret Thatcher in the UK, who came in with an agenda, fought for it, was undermined at every opportunity, but fought for it in spite of that and got a lot done. And even she didn't get that much done. And you can see the United Kingdom drifting back towards statism a generation later, right? It didn't last that long, whatever she did. You're seeing it Chile, talk about Latin America. Look at Chile right now. So Chile got kind of the free market revolution they wanted, right? Not all the way, not as good as we'd like it to be, but pretty good. It went from being the poorest country to the richest country in Latin America. And now the Chileans don't want that anymore. They don't want freedom. They want a new constitution. The new constitution is going to be statist and socialist or fascist or who knows what it'll be, but it's not going to be free. So even a country like Chile, which has seen what poverty and socialism does, was seeing the consequence of capitalism, is going back towards statism and collectivism and socialism, because they never built up their fundamental philosophical ideas in the culture. And I know it's hard and I know it takes a long time, but that's why I don't have any shortcuts. There are no shortcuts in life. All of us, every single one of us would love to live in a capitalist world, but we're not going to, not anytime soon. And the question is, if you're going to engage in an effort to try to change the world, what should you focus on? And you shouldn't be focusing on Republicans versus Democrats, or this authoritarian president in Argentina versus that authoritarian president. I mean, you might have a preference, but don't exert too much energy, because it doesn't matter that much.
I agree. Yaron, Gary Ross is asking here, I agree that both alternatives are horrible for freedom. And I think that for the long run, another Trump presidency would have been worse. My question is, do you think the fact that many more Latinos voted for Trump than expected is a sign that Latinos are not necessarily left-leaning, but vote Democratic, given the anti-immigration rhetoric of the right? I believe most Latinos immigrants go to the US not for handouts, but to work.
I've said this for years and years and years. I think the Republican Party has made a concerted effort to alienate Latinos and to alienate them. And they put in no energy into trying to appeal to them. I think that, we saw this for a long time in Texas. Latinos voted Republican because the Latinos tend to be more conservative. They tend to have come to America for opportunities, not to bring the socialism of their countries into here. In California, Latinos turned dramatically Democratic when Republicans turned dramatically anti-immigrant. So it is very much, there's absolutely no reason Republicans or you should expect Latinos to always be Democratic. I think that's true of all the different groups. I think, I don't think blacks should be voting Democratic. And I don't think the Republicans do enough to appeal to them. They don't engage. They don't go into the neighborhoods. They don't make an effort to make an appeal. I think there's a strong appeal to be made. Now, again, I'm not enamored with Republicans, Democrats. That's not where the focus should be. It should be on freedom versus lack of freedom. And the Republicans have to shape up. The Republicans don't deserve people's votes given what they stand for right now. The Republicans need, if they want to represent freedom, if they claim to represent freedom, then they actually need to do the work to earn that title. Right now, Republicans do not stand for freedom. And therefore, they don't deserve any of these people's votes. But if they truly stood for freedom, then I think they could go after the Latino vote. They could go after the Black vote. They could go after a lot of these votes that they currently do not get.
Yaron, you mentioned Macri and the fountainhead, but there's a question here. It says, I heard that Trump has been influenced by Atlas Shrugged. What do you think of that? And to which point do you think Trump is closer to Rand's philosophy than Biden? And it's true that in Latin America, there's a lot of people trying to engage Trump with objectivism and Ayn Rand. So what would you answer to that?
So there is zero evidence that Trump has ever read Atlas Shrugged or knows of its existence. All we know is that he might have read The Fountainhead. He at least knows the story of The Fountainhead. Who knows? He might have seen the movie. After all, it's about an architect and Trump is a developer. He might have, so he knows something about The Fountainhead. But he has not read Atlas Shrugged, and he's not read the rest of Ayn Rand's literature. There is nothing about Donald Trump that is like Ayn Rand. There is nothing about Donald Trump that is like an Ayn Rand hero. Donald Trump would be an Ayn Rand villain. He would be one of the crony, manipulative, anti-philosophical, anti-principle, anti-ideological villains that she has as businessmen in Atlas Shrugged. Think about all the businessmen who are the villains in Atlas Shrugged. That's much more like Donald Trump than anything else. Now, who is more similar, Biden or Trump, to Ayn Rand's philosophy? Neither. Not if you respect reason. Not if you respect individualism. Not if you respect reality. Donald Trump, for example, I think, is a primacy of, Ayn Rand has this distinction between primacy of existence and primacy of consciousness. Primacy of existence says that existence exists independent of your wishes, independent of what you think, independent of what you would like it to be, of your emotions. But this election is a great example of the fact that Donald Trump does not care about facts, does not care about reality, does not care about what's actually happening. All he cares about are his emotions. And he thinks his emotions somehow shape reality. And by the way, we saw this from day one of his presidency. I mean, one of the first conflicts we had when he was elected president was he claimed that more people were in his inaugural address than in any other president. And he brought satellite photos. And clearly the evidence was no, there weren't that many people at his address. It didn't matter to him. He continued to insist on it. He continued to fight for it, even though all the facts of reality went against it. And you see it over and over and over again in his presidency, the rejection of facts and reality. That kind of mentality, philosophically, that attitude to metaphysics, is as far from Ayn Rand as you could be. Donald Trump is a pragmatist, a committed pragmatist. If it works, it's good. It has nothing to do, no principles, zero principles. And he will admit to that. He doesn't believe in principles. Again, Ayn Rand believed in principles. Now, even if you take his economic policy, him calling up CEOs and telling them where they should put their plans, him controlling the entire distribution of COVID vaccines, this whole warp speed. The only part of warp speed that was good is the part that reduced regulations and got the FDA to approve it faster. And even that was way too slow. I mean, just that would disqualify him from being closer to Ayn Rand. So the whole control, look at the stimulus bill that's just being passed, $900 billion. And Trump thinks it's too small. He wanted a bigger stimulus bill. How is that closer to Ayn Rand than Biden? in principle. Now the numbers might be, Biden might have wanted 2 trillion and Trump would have wanted 1.5 trillion. So he's closer in that one. But that's in a principle sense, in the sense of viewing the role of government or thinking about how to shrink the role of government. Biden and Trump are not in principle different. And certainly Trump is not closer to Ayn Rand in any meaningful way. And I'm not even talking about the authoritarian nature or his desires. He couldn't get away with it because of our system of government, but his desires, and again, his attitudes towards facts, his attitude towards truth, his attitudes towards capitalism, towards freedom, towards trade, towards free trade, his attitude towards free countries versus countries like Russia or North Korea or Saudi Arabia. None of that is anywhere near Ayn Rand. I mean, we could go policy by policy and I'd show you the dramatic chasm between his views and Ayn Rand's views.
Talking about policies, there's a question here. Don't you see a reason why someone would vote for Trump? For example, fossil fuel workers. If they vote for Biden, they are voting for their own destruction, given Biden's plans to reduce fossil fuels dramatically.
I said early on in my talk today, and I've said a million times, of course I see reason why people would vote for Trump. And you gave some good reasons for why people would vote for Trump. I mean, and some people might disagree with my approach to strategy in terms of how bad I think Biden will be versus how bad I think Trump will be. I mean, we can disagree about these specific evaluations. And certainly if you're in an industry that you know the left is going to target, and you're in, and Trump is, relatively speaking, left you alone, relatively, not completely, relatively left you alone, then sure, I can understand it completely. I can understand why certain businessmen have voted for Trump, lots of people, I can understand why they vote for Trump. What I don't understand is people who try to view Donald Trump as God's gift to freedom lovers, or why people view Trump as perfect, as the embodiment of freedom. People who view Trump as the greatest president we've ever had. I mean, this is all things that I've been told that people actually hold. Or people that think that if Biden gets elected, the world will end. And if Trump gets elected, all of that, I think, is wrong. On the concrete, who do I choose right now? Yeah, we can disagree, and it's completely legitimate to disagree about those things. And we're going to have different perspectives. And I've said often, making predictions about the future is super risky business. And it's hard business. And we're likely to disagree about the future and about the path to the future and about what happens in the future and about what the best way to get there strategically in terms of politics. This is why I'm going to fundamentals. What we should be doing is advocating for something we know will lead to freedom. And that is the ideas of reason and individualism. That is the only way we will get there. The politics, who knows how you get there exactly.
So Yaron, you have 2 more minutes left and a lot of questions, so probably we will need to repeat this webinar.
Not surprised.
But Jose is asking here, don't you think that socialism is being redefined by alt-rights to something like anti-God, anti-nationalism, sorry for my pronunciation, kind of thing?
Well, I mean, socialism historically has been relatively secular and has been internationalist rather than nationalist. But look, it's not that everything the alt-right says about the socialists is wrong. Much of what they say is right. It's that the alternative that they offer is just as bad. It's just as collectivist. It's just as statist. It's just as anti-human life. So socialism is awful. Socialism is terrible. There's nothing good about socialism either in theory or in practice. And it needs to be, it needs to be rejected. But if you're going to reject it, you have to have an alternative. And that alternative has to be better. And what the alt-right presents is an alternative just as bad, if not worse.
I agree. Yaron, one more thing to finish this webinar. There's a lot of Trump worshiping going on in Latin America. They hold him as a savior. Do you think this is dangerous for the future, since Latin Americans could potentially elect their own Trump in the future? And what I see is there are many, many pro-freedom groups, libertarian groups, and even some objectivist groups or people who is for Trump. So what are your advice for them? What would you say, what we can do to not fall into the same that you are falling?
Yeah, I mean, again, I think you have to separate people who are for Trump and people who are dedicated to Trump, that are passionate, unequivocal supporters of what he does and what he represents and who he is. And I think that the worship of the person like that is very dangerous. It will lead pro-freedom organizations towards ultimately falling into the trap of supporting authoritarianism, because that's where this worship of Trump, I think, is leading. It will lead towards authoritarianism. Again, that doesn't mean everybody voted for Trump. It just means the worship of Trump. I think that if you analyze the ideas that Trump represents, try to get beyond his anti-left. Try to get the positive ideas he represents. In his own words, what does he actually stand for? And you will see that he is not a freedom lover. He is not a supporter of capitalism or freedom or of liberty. So if you are supportive of liberty, then don't worship a person. Don't worship any person. Certainly don't worship any person who is in politics. Because they are not, I mean, in this case, Trump is not an advocate of freedom. He is not an advocate of liberty. He is not going to move us. I mean, his ideas are not going to move us in that direction. Latin America is very susceptible, as we know, to authoritarianism. You don't need more authoritarians in Latin America. What you need is a real liberty movement, a real freedom movement. And that means a movement dedicated to the ideas of liberty, to the principles. There's a word Donald Trump doesn't know how to spell. Principle. Principles of liberty, principles of capitalism, principles of freedom. So all these groups in Latin America and everywhere else in the world who claim to be for freedom, claim to be for liberty, need to dedicate themselves to those ideas and to fight for those ideas. And when one day, hopefully, we get a politician that actually stands for those ideas, then support them. But in the meantime, don't sell out, don't compromise by, again, and I'm not talking about voting for one person or another, but I'm talking about fully, unequivocally supporting somebody. Don't do it. You're going to be trapped by the authoritarians, and you're going to waste energy and time and effort that could be devoted to actually fighting for the principles on which freedom is based, the principles that we need in order to have a better future one day.
Yaron, thank you very much for this webinar. Thank you for your time, and we will keep working from Ayn Rand Center Latin America to try to promote those principles you're talking about. So
thank you, Maria. Thank you for all the work you do in Latin America, and I look forward to actually visiting in person and getting an opportunity to tour Latin America and to talk to people in person.
2021. So I hope you have you and a lot of the ARI staff here in Latin America.
I certainly hope so.
Thanks a lot. Thanks to all the people that has been here with us, and thank you, Ayn Rand Institute, and see you soon in our